Imagine you're driving home after a long shift. You've done this route 100 times. You know every turn, every light, and then you see the lights behind you. You pull over, you hand over your license and registration. The officer writes the ticket. You drive away thinking you know exactly what just happened. But here's what most drivers never find out: the rules around how that ticket gets written, how it gets processed, and what happens next have been quietly changing in several states. And most people only discover that after it's already too late. That's what we're looking at today. Not the familiar story of a driver arguing a ticket on the side of the road, but the part of the process that happens before the stop, during it, and long after, and specifically, what's changed that many drivers are completely unaware of. If you find these kinds of practical traffic education stories useful, consider subscribing. New videos go up regularly, and every one is designed to help you understand situations that could realistically affect you. Let's set up a real scenario to walk this through properly. A driver, we'll call her Sandra, had been driving for about 18 years with a reasonably clean record. One moderate speeding ticket years back, otherwise nothing serious. She lived in a state that had recently updated its traffic enforcement guidelines, though she had no idea that had happened. One afternoon, she was driving on an interstate, moving with the general flow of traffic. She wasn't weaving, she wasn't driving aggressively, but a patrol vehicle clocked her going 11 miles per hour over the posted limit. The officer approached, professional, polite, wrote the ticket. Sandra accepted it without much thought, signed the acknowledgement, and drove away. What she didn't know, and what most drivers still don't know, is that the state she was driving in had recently changed how certain speed violations are categorized, how they interact with insurance reporting thresholds, and critically, how drivers can formally respond to those violations in ways that weren't available before. Here's the first thing worth understanding: speed violations are not treated the same way in every state. That's not new, but what has changed in recent years, and specifically in a growing number of states, is how those violations are classified on the back end. Historically, most states operated on a fairly simple structure. You were speeding, you got a ticket, you paid it, or you contested it in traffic court. The violation went on your record. Your insurance company eventually found out. Your rate may have gone up. That structure still exists, but layered on top of it now, in certain states, are newer classification systems that sort violations differently depending on factors like how many miles per hour over the limit the driver was going, whether the stop occurred in a designated high-risk zone, and whether the driver had any prior violations within a specific look-back window. What this means in practice is that a ticket that once would have been treated as a single uniform event, one speeding violation, may now be processed under a different tier depending on those factors, and the tier it lands in can affect things like whether it qualifies for a diversion program, whether it's reportable to insurance under that state's current rules, and how long it stays on the record. Sandra's ticket, it turned out, fell into a category that qualified her for something she hadn't been told about at the roadside. This is the part that frustrates a lot of drivers when they eventually learn it. Officers are not required to explain every procedural option available to a driver at the time of a stop. That's not a criticism of law enforcement. It's simply not part of their role at Roadside. Their job is to enforce the law, document the stop, and issue the citation if one is warranted. What happens administratively after that is a separate process. But the result is that many drivers walk away from a stop without knowing that the violation they just received may qualify for a response option they were never told about. In Sandra's case, her state had recently expanded its traffic violation diversion program. These programs go by different names depending on the state: traffic school, defensive driving diversion, deferred adjudication, citation dismissal programs. The structure varies, but the core idea in most of them is similar. A driver with a qualifying violation and a qualifying record can complete a specific course or program, and in exchange the violation may be kept off their public driving record or handled in a way that limits its insurance impact. The problem is that the window to enroll in these programs is typically short, and because nobody told Sandra at the roadside, and because she didn't read the fine print on her citation carefully enough, she missed that window entirely. Her ticket processed normally. Her insurance company found out during her next policy review. Her rate went up. A different outcome was genuinely available to her. She just didn't know to look for it. So let's talk about what specifically has changed in several states and why it matters. First, it's important to say clearly, traffic laws are state-specific. What applies in one state may not apply in another, and rules change regularly. The information here is intended to help you understand the general landscape, not to give you legal advice for your specific situation. Always Check your state's DMV website or consult a traffic attorney if you've received a citation and want to understand your options. With that said, here are the categories of change that have been occurring across multiple states. The expansion of tiered violation classification. Several states have moved away from treating all speeding violations as a single category and toward systems that sort them by severity. A driver going 6 miles per hour over the limit in a residential zone is not in the same category as a driver going 22 miles over on an open highway. Even though both might receive what looks like an identical citation on the surface, the classification tier affects what programs the driver qualifies for, how the violation affects points on their license, and in some states, whether the violation is automatically reported to insurance carriers. If you receive a citation and the tier it falls into is not immediately clear to you from the paperwork, it's worth contacting the issuing court or your state DMV to ask directly. Changes to insurance reporting thresholds. Several states have updated the threshold at which a speeding violation triggers mandatory insurance reporting. In plain terms, this means that in some states, a minor speeding violation, particularly a first offense below a certain miles per hour threshold, may no longer be automatically shared with your insurance carrier under the state's motor vehicle record reporting system. This does not mean the violation disappears. It still exists in the court system and on your driving record. But the automatic pipeline that used to send it directly to insurance carriers has been modified in some jurisdictions. Insurance companies can still discover violations through their own periodic MVR checks, but the timing and circumstances of that discovery may have changed. Why does this matter? Because many drivers assume their insurance will automatically go up the moment they receive a ticket. In some states, that remains true. In others, it depends more on when and how the insurer pulls their record, and whether the violation meets the current reporting threshold. Expansion of remote and online diversion. Eligibility. This is one of the more practically significant changes, and it directly affects what options a driver has after receiving a citation. Historically, diversion programs like traffic school required in-person attendance. A driver would show up to a class, sit through several hours of instruction, and receive documentation that the program was completed. Many states have now expanded these programs to include fully online completion. More importantly, several states have also broadened which violations qualify. Violations that previously would not have been eligible for diversion may now qualify under updated criteria. The catch is the enrollment window. In most states, a driver must request to enroll in a diversion program within a very specific number of days after the citation is issued. That window varies by state. In some jurisdictions, it's as short as 15 days. In others, it may extend to 30 or 45. But once it closes, it closes. The citation itself may contain information about this option, but it's often buried in small print or referenced only by a program name that most drivers don't immediately recognize. Back to Sandra. When she eventually learned what she had missed several weeks after the window had closed, she did what many drivers do in that situation. She looked for other options. She contacted the court. She asked whether there was any appeal or late enrollment possibility. The answer was no. The administrative window had closed, the violation had been processed, and the record had been finalized. She then spoke to a traffic attorney to understand whether there was any remaining path. The attorney confirmed that her window had passed and that her options at that point were limited to paying the fine and managing the insurance impact separately. The attorney also said something that Sandra found genuinely useful. He told her that the single most effective thing most drivers can do after receiving a citation is read the entire citation document, every line, within the first 24 hours. And if anything is unclear, contact the court listed on the citation before the first administrative deadline passes. That advice, he noted, applies in nearly every state, regardless of what the current rules look like. There's a broader pattern here that's worth pausing on. Traffic enforcement has always been a mixture of on-the-spot interaction, the stop itself, and back-end administrative process, what happens with the documentation afterward. Most driver education, both formal and informal, focuses heavily on the first part: how to behave at a traffic stop, what rights you have, what to say or not say. All of that remains important. But the second part, the administrative process, the paperwork, the deadlines, the programs, gets very little attention in most driver education. And increasingly, that second part is where the real consequences play out. A driver who handles a traffic stop perfectly calm, respectful, cooperative can still end up with a significantly worse outcome than necessary simply because they didn't engage with the paperwork correctly afterward. Here's what the practical picture looks like if you receive a speeding citation today. The first thing to do is read the citation carefully. All of it. Look for any reference to a court date, a payment deadline, a diversion program option, or an administrative response window. These will often be on the back of the citation or in a separate insert document. The second thing to do is look up your state's DMV or Department of Transportation website specifically regarding the violation you received. Most states publish information about their current point system, diversion program eligibility, and insurance reporting rules. This information is public and free. The third thing is to move quickly. The most common mistake drivers make is waiting. They intend to deal with it but set it aside. Weeks pass. By the time they're ready to respond, the best options may no longer be available. The fourth thing, and this is particularly relevant given the recent changes in multiple states, is not to assume that what was true the last time you received a citation is still true today. Traffic laws and their accompanying administrative procedures update regularly. A diversion program that wasn't available 2 years ago may now be available. A threshold that used to affect your insurance automatically may have changed. Confirm the current rules, not the ones you remember. What would you do in Sandra's situation? Would you have read every line of that citation within the first 24 hours? Or would you have set it aside intending to deal with it later? It's a realistic question. Most people, when asked honestly, admit they would have done exactly what Sandra did. The paperwork feels secondary. The fine seems straightforward. The instinct is to pay it and move on. That instinct is understandable, but it's also the instinct that causes many drivers to miss options they didn't know existed. The core lesson of Sandra's story is not that the system failed her. The rules existed. The program existed. The information was technically available. What wasn't in place was the habit of engaging seriously with traffic citation documents and understanding that the administrative side of a violation carries its own set of deadlines and opportunities. Traffic laws are evolving, diversion programs are expanding, classification systems are becoming more layered, and as those changes happen, the gap between drivers who understand the current landscape and drivers who don't becomes more significant. If you've made it this far, you probably care about understanding how traffic situations actually work, not just the basics, but the real mechanics that most people never look into until they're already dealing with the consequences. That's exactly what this channel is here for. If these practical, in-depth educational stories are useful to you, subscribing ensures you don't miss the next one. Traffic enforcement is not a simple subject. It never has been, but it's also not an impossible one to understand. The drivers who tend to come out of situations like Sandra's with the best outcomes are rarely the ones who argued the best at the roadside. They're the ones who took the paperwork seriously afterward. Every citation is a document with a process attached to it. That process has rules. Those rules have deadlines. And increasingly, those rules have options that are available to you, but only if you know to look. The laws keep changing. The question is whether you're keeping up with them.